History holds records of nights that refuse to end. We are about to journey through 30 of the most baffling accounts of prolonged darkness from ancient civilizations across the globe. By the end, you will understand how these events shaped myths, toppled empires, and left a permanent mark on human history. Why would a society record a 3-day night on a clay tablet? And what could possibly make the sun vanish for an entire week? What kind of event could make the entire world go dark? Our first record takes us to the banks of the Nile around 1200 BCE. An ancient Egyptian papyrus, a text known as the Admonitions of Ipuwer, paints a terrifying picture of a world turned upside down. It describes a time when the sun itself failed and a profound darkness smothered the land. The river is blood, one lament reads, and men are afraid to taste it. This was not the peaceful, predictable darkness of night, but a deep, unnatural gloom that lasted for days. The papyrus details social chaos with the rich and poor trading places and the established order crumbling into dust. This was a complete collapse of their known world, all under a sunless sky. What could have caused such a catastrophic event? Scholars point to two primary suspects. The first is a massive volcanic eruption, perhaps from a volcano thousands of miles away. A sufficiently large eruption can pump billions of tons of ash and sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere, creating a veil that circles the globe and blocks sunlight for years. The other possibility is an extraordinarily long and complete solar eclipse, though an eclipse lasting multiple days defies our current understanding of celestial mechanics. The volcanic theory, however, fits remarkably well. Such an event would explain not only the darkness but also the referenced pollution of the Nile, as ashfall could turn waters murky and toxic, killing fish and making the river undrinkable. This prolonged darkness fundamentally reshaped Egyptian society and religion. Imagine the terror of a people who worshipped the sun god Ra as the ultimate source of life, order, and stability. To see his power seemingly extinguished for days on end would have been a theological catastrophe. It directly challenged their core belief in Maat, the cosmic order of the universe. This event likely fueled a crisis of faith, forcing priests and pharaohs to explain why the gods had abandoned them. The societal upheaval described in the papyrus, the inversion of the social classes, can be seen as a direct consequence of this divine failure. The darkness was not just an atmospheric phenomenon, it was a crack in the very foundation of their reality, an event so profound its memory was woven into their most dire warnings for generations. Centuries later and a world away, a similar terror was meticulously recorded. In the year 780 before the Common Era, Chinese chronicles note a day when the sky went dark at noon. The Bamboo Annals, a core historical text, documents this sudden, extended night with chilling clarity. Imagine the scene in the royal courts of the Zhou dynasty. Astronomers whose job was to read the heavens and predict the emperor's fate would have watched in horror as the sun vanished. This was not a brief dimming. It was a profound darkness that lasted, by some accounts, for an entire day. The precision of their records is what makes this event so compelling. They noted the positions of stars and planets during the blackout, creating a celestial snapshot of a world plunged into an untimely night. This was not just weather, it was a fundamental disruption of the cosmic order they so carefully documented. Such an event could not be separated from the politics of the age. In ancient China, the emperor ruled by the mandate of heaven, a divine right to govern that was directly linked to the harmony of the cosmos. A prolonged, unexplained darkness was the ultimate bad omen. It was seen as a clear sign that the heavens were withdrawing their favor, that the emperor had lost his moral authority. This single event likely triggered immense social and political turmoil. Court scholars would have debated its meaning furiously, while rival factions might have used it as evidence to challenge the ruling dynasty. The darkness was a political weapon, a celestial indictment that shook the very foundation of power. How did the scholars of the time try to explain it? Their interpretations were rooted in their understanding of a balanced universe. They believed this was a clash between the forces of yin and yang, where the dark, cold yin energy had temporarily overwhelmed the bright, active yang of the sun. It was a cosmic imbalance made terrifyingly real. This record from 780 BCE is more than just an account of a strange day. It is a window into a world where the sky was a message board for the gods, and a single, sunless afternoon could threaten to bring down an empire. Further east, the mighty Assyrian Empire also faced an inexplicable siege of darkness. A clay tablet from the royal archives, dating to around 700 BCE, coldly documents a 3-day night that fell upon the land. The cuneiform script describes a darkness so absolute it was as if the day had been stolen, a time when no fire, lamp, or torch could pierce the oppressive gloom. This was not a quiet night. It was a period of profound fear in one of history's most formidable military states. Imagine the terror in the streets of Nineveh, a city of brutal warriors and grand palaces, brought to a standstill not by an enemy army, but by a sky that had simply gone out. The empire's entire identity was built on control and power, yet here was a force against which their armies were utterly useless. The language used is stark, emphasizing a complete loss of order, a theme that would have resonated deeply with the Assyrians' own view of their king as the sole guarantor of cosmic and earthly stability. So what could have blotted out the sun over Assyria for 3 full days? Modern researchers point to 2 compelling, natural explanations rooted in the region's geography. The first is a colossal dust storm, a phenomenon not uncommon in the Middle East, but of an unprecedented and terrifying scale. A series of powerful storms could have lifted such immense quantities of fine silt and sand into the atmosphere that the sun was completely obscured for an extended period. The second, more dramatic theory involves the aftermath of a comet impact. While a direct hit would have caused instantaneous devastation, a near miss or an atmospheric explosion could have sent a vast plume of pulverized rock and vaporized ice high into the air. This ejector would have circled the globe, creating a dense, sun-blocking shield that could indeed have resulted in days of darkness for the entire region. Whether from desert sands or celestial debris, the Assyrian 3-day night stands as a stark reminder that even the most powerful empires are subject to the raw, unpredictable forces of the planet and the cosmos beyond. Across the Mediterranean, another civilization preserved the memory of a great darkness in the language of myth. The ancient Greeks spoke of Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, who was so powerful that even Zeus himself feared to cross her. Her domain was not the gentle transition from day to evening, but a deep, tangible darkness that could swallow the world whole. Some of the oldest fragments of Greek poetry, hints within the stories of the Titanomachy, the great war between the gods and the Titans, describe a period when Nyx was unleashed, a time when the sun was hidden for days. This was not just a poetic device, it was a cultural scar, a memory of a time when the natural order was broken. What archaeological evidence could possibly support such a legendary event? While no single tablet states the sun vanished, we find clues in unexpected places. Pottery shards from that era, around 750 before the Common Era, show a dramatic shift in artistic themes. Scenes of daily life under a bright sun are replaced by depictions of chaotic battles in shadowy landscapes, of gods wreathed in gloom. The stylistic change is so abrupt it suggests a collective trauma, a shared experience that demanded expression in their art. Furthermore, early Linear B writings, the script of the Mycenaean Greeks, contain cryptic references to rituals meant to call back the sun or appease the dark sky, phrases that hint at a real, prolonged crisis of light. How does a myth of a goddess become a plausible historical record? The answer lies in how oral traditions function. before widespread literacy, cataclysmic events were woven into the fabric of stories to ensure they were never forgotten. A week of inexplicable darkness would be personified as the goddess Nyx stretching her wings across the heavens. The societal collapse and warfare that might have followed such an ecological disaster would become the epic Titanomachy, a war in the heavens that mirrored the chaos on Earth. This was their way of encoding a real, terrifying event into their cultural DNA, a warning from the past that the light itself was not a guarantee. The story of Nyx is more than a tale of a powerful goddess. It is likely the Greek explanation for a sun that failed, a mystery preserved in myth for 1,000 years. Far to the west, in the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, the fear of a vanishing sun was etched into the very heart of civilization. Ancient Maya codices, books made of bark paper, contain prophecies and histories of great cycles of destruction, and among the most dreaded was the event known as the sun eating. These texts do not describe a simple eclipse, but a prolonged period where the sun god, Kinish Ahau, was believed to have been defeated or trapped in the underworld, casting the world into a deep chill and darkness. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving pre-Columbian books, depicts deities of darkness and disaster presiding over these times, with dates calculated by their precise calendars marking periods of cosmic crisis. This was not mere mythology, it was a recorded expectation of a cataclysm that had happened before and could happen again. How did a society so advanced in astronomy explain such a terrifying phenomenon? Their entire cosmology was built on cycles of death and rebirth, and a prolonged darkness signaled the end of one world age and the painful birth of the next. The societal response was rooted in this belief. To appease the gods and ensure the sun's return, they performed elaborate rituals, the most extreme of which involved human sacrifice. They believed the sun required the most precious substance, human life force, to be strengthened for its daily battle against the forces of darkness. A prolonged night would have been interpreted as the gods demanding a greater price, leading to intensified ceremonies to relight the celestial fire. This deep cultural fear was not born in a vacuum. Geological evidence provides a stunningly plausible trigger. A massive volcanic eruption from the El Chichon volcano in southern Mexico, dated to around the year 540 of the Common Era, would have been a generation-defining catastrophe. The explosion would have sent a colossal plume of ash and sulfur high into the atmosphere, creating a volcanic winter that could have blotted out the sun for weeks across the region. The correlation is striking, a known geological event of immense power occurring within the time frame of these cultural memories. The oral traditions of later peoples, like the Aztecs, who spoke of a past age of destruction called the jaguar sun, where the sun was killed and giants were devoured by jaguars in the dark, likely preserved this same ancient trauma. The story was preserved for over 1,000 years, passed down through generations and meticulously painted onto codices because it represented their deepest understanding of a fragile universe, a world where the sun's light was not a promise, but a hard-won victory that had to be fought for every single day. This deep-seated fear of a sunless world was not confined to the Mediterranean or the Americas. Far to the north, as autumn deepened into the time we now call October, the ancient Celts prepared for their own confrontation with encroaching darkness. Their festival of Samhain, marking the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter, was already a time of profound transition, but woven into its earliest folklore are whispers of something far more terrifying than a long winter night. Old Irish texts and oral traditions speak of a Samhain when the night did not end, when the dawn was delayed for what felt like days. This was not a simple change of season, it was a rupture in the natural order, an event so disturbing it became permanently etched into their worldview. What could have caused the sun to simply refuse to rise on schedule? A dense, persistent fog bank, unusual for that time of year, could have smothered the landscape for days, but the descriptions suggest something more profound. A more compelling theory points to the atmospheric effects of a distant volcanic eruption. We know from ice core samples that a significant eruption occurred in Iceland around the 6th century, an event that would have spewed a high-altitude haze across northern Europe. This aerosol veil could have dramatically reddened and dimmed the sun for months, making the days seem perpetually twilight and the nights impenetrably black. For a people already observing the sun's weakening power, a sudden intensification of this effect during Samhain would have felt like the world was slipping into eternal night. This experience fundamentally shaped their most iconic beliefs. The concept of the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead thinning at Samhain takes on a new, literal meaning when you consider a multi-day darkness. If the sun, the symbol of life and the familiar world, could be extinguished, then surely the barriers protecting them from the spirits of the other world could also fail. The darkness was not empty, it was populated. It was a time when the rules of reality were suspended and unseen forces walked the earth. This is why fire became the central, non-negotiable ritual of the festival. Bonfires were not just for warmth or light, they were a desperate, collective act of sympathetic magic. By lighting great fires on the hilltops, the community was performing a ritual to strengthen the failing sun, to push back the supernatural dark and convince the celestial powers to return. They were quite literally fighting the night with fire, an archetypal human response to a terror that threatened to become permanent. The memory of that prolonged Samhain night echoes in our modern Halloween, a ghost of a time when the ancestors truly believed the sun might not come back. The meticulous astronomers of Babylon saw this prolonged darkness not as a random disaster, but as a calculated message. Around 650 before the Common Era, their cuneiform tablets documented a terrifying celestial omen, a period when the day was consumed by night. For the Babylonian astrologer priests, the sky was a divine text, and every event from a shooting star to a vanished sun was a direct communication from the gods Marduk and Ishtar. An extended darkness was the most severe warning possible, a sign of divine displeasure that threatened the entire kingdom. They did not simply record the event, they analyzed it with chilling precision. These priest scholars would have noted the positions of planets and stars during the blackout, searching for patterns. Was Mars, the god of war and pestilence, ascendant in the house of the moon god Sin? Such a configuration would have been interpreted as a prophecy of conflict and famine sent by the gods themselves. The darkness was never just darkness, it was a symptom of a deeper cosmic imbalance. The king's response was immediate and ritualized. Upon receiving the priest's interpretation, he would have enacted a series of prescribed ceremonies to appease the angry deities. This could involve public prayers, lavish offerings of food and precious metals at the temples, and even the performance of a special ritual known as the substitute king. In this extreme rite, a commoner would be placed on the throne as a temporary stand-in, absorbing the divine wrath forecast by the omen. After a set number of days, this substitute would be quietly executed, thereby carrying the kingdom's destined punishment to the grave with him. While the true king resumed his rule, the cosmic balance restored. The entire society would have been mobilized for these appeasements, from the high priests chanting in the ziggurats to the common people leaving their own small offerings. The Babylonian reaction shows a civilization that believed it could negotiate with catastrophe. They saw a world governed by a divine bureaucracy, where a correctly filed ritual could cancel a heavenly decree of doom. This was their science and their survival manual, a desperate attempt to bring back the light by deciphering the anger written in the stars. But the fear of an endless night was a global phenomenon, echoing even in the sacred hymns of ancient India. Deep within the world's oldest scriptures, the Rig Veda, composed over 3,000 years ago, we find haunting descriptions of a time when light was stolen from the world. One powerful hymn pleads, "O sun, when you were hidden by the darkness which was your own, we approached you with our words." This was not a prayer for a cloudy day. it was a desperate invocation against a deep, pervasive gloom that had already fallen. The texts describe a conflict between the forces of light and darkness, where the sun was trapped and had to be won back piece by the gods. The poetic language is vivid, speaking of a darkness that could be milked like a cow, a tangible, suffocating presence that settled over the land. What could have inspired such a profound and terrifying metaphor? Many scholars point to a geological catastrophe of almost unimaginable scale, the Toba supervolcanic eruption. Occurring around 74,000 years ago on the island of Sumatra, this was the most massive volcanic event in the last 2 million years. Its aftermath would have been a global disaster. The eruption is estimated to have ejected enough ash and sulfuric aerosols into the atmosphere to plunge the entire planet into a volcanic winter that may have lasted for a decade. For any human populations living on the Indian subcontinent, just a few thousand miles downwind, the event would have been apocalyptic. The sky would have turned a sickly gray, then a deep, impenetrable black as a thick blanket of ash settled over everything. The sun would have vanished, not for hours but for years. This was not a single long night, it was a seemingly permanent state of twilight and cold. The memory of such a cataclysm, passed down through countless generations in oral tradition, would have been seared into the cultural consciousness. It became the foundational chaos, the great darkness that preceded the cosmic order. This event is woven directly into the core of Hindu cosmology, into the very story of creation. The concept of pralaya, the great dissolution where the universe is cyclically destroyed and reabsorbed into the divine, often begins with a period of overwhelming darkness. The imagery of the god Vishnu sleeping on the cosmic serpent in a state of potentiality, floating on the waters of a formless void, mirrors a world waiting for the sun's return after a global winter. The Rigvedic hymns themselves are not just poems, they are acts of creation, attempts to use sacred sound and ritual to re-establish cosmic order, to literally chant the sun back into the sky. The memory of a world without light became the ultimate stakes for their entire spiritual practice, a warning of what happens when the balance of the universe is lost, and a celebration of the divine power that fights to bring back the dawn. The Persian Empire understood the universe as a battlefield between two primordial forces. On one side stood Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Light, Wisdom, and Creation. Opposing him was the destructive spirit Angra Mainyu, whom the Persians called Ahriman, the embodiment of lies, darkness, and chaos. Zoroastrian sacred texts, particularly the Avesta, describe a time when Ahriman's power surged, casting a great shadow over the land. This was not a mere metaphor for evil, but a literal, prolonged darkness that was seen as a direct assault by the evil spirit upon the world of light. The texts describe this event as a time when the sun was dimmed and the land grew cold, a clear victory for the forces of darkness in their eternal war. How does a philosophical concept of evil become a record of a specific historical catastrophe? The answer lies in the Zoroastrian worldview, where spiritual conflict manifests in the physical realm. A sudden, inexplicable darkness lasting for days would have been the ultimate proof that Ahriman was winning. This was a terrifying prospect, as it signaled a potential unmaking of the ordered world. The Persian Empire, at its zenith, was a bastion of administration and power, yet its core mythology held a deep-seated fear of this exact scenario. The king, as the representative of Ahura Mazda on Earth, would have been under immense pressure to respond. His role was to actively fight this cosmic darkness through ritual and righteous rule. What kind of real-world event could have been interpreted as Ahriman's shadow falling across the empire? The geography of the region offers two compelling possibilities. The first is a colossal sandstorm, a simoom of unprecedented scale rising from the deserts of Arabia. Such a storm could have carried fine, suspended dust for hundreds of miles, blotting out the sun over the Persian heartland for a day or more, turning day into an eerie twilight nightmare. The second, more dramatic theory points to volcanic activity. A major eruption from a volcano like Mount Damavand, the legendary peak in northern Iran, could have produced a vast plume of ash that spread a canopy of darkness over the plains below. Either event would have been catastrophic for agriculture and daily life, but within the Zoroastrian faith, it would have been framed as a spiritual emergency. The prescribed response was not just to wait for the wind to change, but to engage in communal prayers and sacred fires. Fire temples where an eternal flame was kept burning became the front lines in this battle. By strengthening the symbolic fires on earth, they believed they were reinforcing the power of the celestial light, helping Ahura Mazda push back the encroaching dark. This record of Ahriman's shadow is a profound example of how a civilization filters a real environmental disaster through its deepest beliefs, transforming a geological event into a chapter in the eternal war between light and dark. The ninth plague of Egypt strikes with a terrifying simplicity, a darkness that could be felt. For 3 days, the book of Exodus tells us, a thick gloom fell over the land, a darkness so absolute that no one could see another or move from their place. Yet, in a chilling detail, the text notes that the Israelites in the region of Goshen enjoyed light in their dwellings. This was not a natural night. It was a targeted, palpable shroud of blackness, a divine judgment that paralyzed a nation. The theological meaning was profound, a direct assault on the Egyptian sun god, Ra. By blotting out the sun, the god of the Hebrews was demonstrating supremacy over the very heart of Egyptian religion and Pharaoh's own claimed divinity. But what physical phenomenon could possibly account for such a specific, localized, and intense event? The most immediate scientific explanation points to a Khamsin, a powerful, sand-laden windstorm that blows across North Africa. A severe Khamsin can indeed lift enough fine dust into the air to turn day into an eerie, orange twilight, sometimes for days on end. The description of a darkness one could feel aligns perfectly with the sensation of fine, abrasive silt coating the skin and filling the lungs. This explanation, however, struggles with the biblical claim of selective illumination. How could one region remain brightly lit while its neighbor was plunged into an impenetrable murk? A far more cataclysmic theory involves the colossal volcanic eruption of Thera, a volcanic island in the Mediterranean. This event, one of the largest eruptions in human history, occurred around the 16th century before the Common Era, a time frame that some scholars controversially link to the Exodus narrative. The eruption would have sent a towering plume of ash and pumice high into the atmosphere. Prevailing winds could have carried this dense ash cloud directly over Egypt, creating a days-long blackout far deeper and more frightening than any dust storm. The selective nature of the darkness could then be explained by localized weather patterns, where a sudden shift in wind or a rare break in the cloud cover spared the land of Goshen while the rest of Egypt remained buried under the volcanic pall. Geological evidence from Egyptian soil cores has, in fact, revealed a thin layer of volcanic ash dating from this exact period, a silent, scientific witness to a sky once filled with fire and ash. Whether a divinely guided storm or the distant fury of a volcano, the 3 days of darkness remains one of history's most powerful and debated records, a story where faith, history, and geology collide in the deep of an Egyptian night. The assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 before the Common Era did not just plunge Rome into political chaos, it seemingly blotted out the sun itself. Roman historians like Cassius Dio and Plutarch recorded a strange and terrifying event, a day of profound darkness that fell over the city in the months after the Ides of March. This was not an ordinary overcast day. It was interpreted by the populace and the elite as a direct sign from the gods, a divine portent of the republic's impending collapse. The darkness was seen as the heavens mourning the murdered dictator, a cosmic condemnation of the act that the conspirators had believed was a noble deed to save the republic. In a society where omens dictated state policy, this event was a political earthquake, how could a simple meteorological event be mistaken for a divine message? The most plausible explanation is a dense, persistent fog bank settling over Rome, perhaps exacerbated by smoke from countless altars and hearths. Yet the timing and intensity of the event have led some researchers to suggest a more distant cause, the ash from a volcanic eruption, possibly from Mount Etna in Sicily. A significant eruption there could have pumped fine particulates high into the atmosphere, carried by winds to create a hazy, dimming effect over the Italian peninsula for days or even weeks. This natural phenomenon landed on a city already vibrating with tension and superstition. The political impact was immediate and profound. The conspirators, Brutus and Cassius, found their cause morally undermined by the heavens themselves. Their claim to be liberators was now shadowed by the implication that they had committed a sacrilege. Conversely, Caesar's adopted heir, the young Octavian, seized upon this omen. He used the public fear and the narrative of a violated natural order to rally support, positioning himself as the rightful avenger of his divine father. The Day of Darkness became a powerful piece of propaganda in the ensuing civil wars, a symbol that the old republic was dying with Caesar and that a new order was struggling to be born from the unnatural gloom. The ruins of the Roman Forum stand as silent witnesses to this moment, a place where a shift in the weather was interpreted as a shift in the fate of the world, proving that sometimes the sky itself can become a player in human history. Across the sea in feudal Japan, a different kind of darkness legend took shape, one not of gods or plagues, but of a ship. Folklore from the southern islands speaks of the Kurofune, a mysterious black ship whose arrival was said to herald a prolonged and unnatural night. This was not a vessel of wood and sail, but a spectral apparition, an omen of calamity that emerged from the mist. Early chronicles describe how its coming would be followed by a deep gloom that smothered the sun for days, a time when the very air grew heavy and cold. The cultural symbolism here is profound. In a society that had deliberately isolated itself from the world, the concept of an outside force, a black ship from beyond the horizon, was the ultimate metaphor for an uncontrollable foreign threat. It represented the unknown, a power that could disrupt the shogun's carefully ordered world and literally blot out the light. But what real event could have inspired such a potent and specific legend? Geological evidence points to a catastrophic trigger, the colossal eruption of the Kikai caldera around 6,300 years ago. This volcanic event, one of the largest in Japan's history, would have devastated the southern islands. The eruption column would have towered into the sky, spewing a river of superheated gas and rock, and blanketing the region in a thick layer of ash. For anyone living downwind, the sky would have turned an inky black as this immense ash cloud rolled overhead, creating a false night that could have lasted for weeks. The memory of this apocalyptic event, passed down through countless generations, slowly transformed in the collective imagination. The terrifying, sky-blackening plume of ash became personified as the Kurofune, the black ship, a single, identifiable source for the incomprehensible darkness that had once consumed their world. This story was then meticulously integrated into local traditions and art. Ukiyo-e prints from the Edo period sometimes depict this very legend, showing dark, spectral ships sailing under a starless, oppressive sky, their forms blending with the clouds of an approaching storm. These artworks were not just illustrations, they were a form of cultural memory, a way of giving a name and a face to a primordial fear. The legend of the Kurofune endures because it perfectly encapsulates a historical trauma, translating the brute force of a volcanic super-eruption into a haunting narrative of a ghost ship that brings the night, a story that warned of the fragility of their isolated world. For the Norse, the end of the world was preceded by a winter that lasted 3 years. Their sagas called this the Fimbulwinter, the Great and Terrible Winter, a time when the sun grew dim and brother killed brother in a world locked in ice and shadow. This was not a simple seasonal change, but the definitive sign that Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, was imminent. The sun would be swallowed, the poetic Edda tells us, and fierce winds would scour the earth, a prophecy of a darkness far deeper than any Arctic night. What historical reality could lie beneath such a stark apocalyptic vision? The climatic conditions of the Viking Age provide a compelling clue. Beginning around the year 536 of the Common Era, tree rings from across Scandinavia and Europe tell a story of a catastrophic decade. The rings become desperately narrow, indicating a sudden, severe cooling that stunted growth for years. This was not a local cold snap, it was a global climate event, a volcanic winter triggered by a massive eruption or possibly multiple eruptions. Ice cores from Greenland contain layers of sulfate deposits from this exact period, the chemical fingerprint of a volcano powerful enough to veil the entire northern hemisphere in a reflective haze of sulfuric acid droplets. This aerosol shield would have dramatically reduced the amount of sunlight reaching the ground, leading to failed harvests, famine, and a sun that appeared as a pale, muted disk even at midday. For a people whose survival and cosmology were tied to the sun's journey across the sky, its weakening would have been a terrifying omen. The societal chaos described in the sagas, where kinship breaks down and society collapses into a desperate struggle for survival, perfectly mirrors the kind of social disintegration that follows prolonged famine. The memory of this generation-defining catastrophe, a time when the summer sun never truly warmed the land, was preserved for centuries in oral tradition. It became the Fimbulwinter, the necessary precursor to the end of all things, because for those who lived through it, the world as they knew it truly did die. The legends were their way of encoding a real environmental disaster into their understanding of cosmic order, a warning that even the gods could be threatened by a sun that failed to return. Deep within the creation stories of Australia's first peoples, a profound darkness marks the beginning of everything. Aboriginal oral traditions, passed down for over 60,000 years, describe the dream time not as a distant past, but as a continuing reality where ancestral beings shaped the world. In many of these foundational narratives, this act of creation emerges from a formless, silent void, a great and timeless darkness. This was not an empty darkness, but a state of pure potential, a spiritual canvas waiting for the first songs and journeys to bring forth the light, the land, and all living things. The ancestral beings moved through this gloom, and their actions, their very footprints, infused the world with meaning. How do you preserve a memory of a world before the sun for thousands of years? The Aboriginal peoples perfected a system of knowledge keeping far more durable than written text, the songline. A songline is a melodic map of the land, a sequence of verses that describes the path an ancestral being took during the dreamtime. By singing the song in the correct order while walking across the country, one literally retraces the steps of creation. Woven into these songs are often references to that primordial darkness, the state from which the ancestor emerged. The stories are also encoded in intricate dot paintings, where symbols and patterns represent the journey from the dark void into the vibrant, living world we know today. These are not mere legends, they are the living legal, historical, and spiritual title deeds to the land itself. What cataclysmic event could have inspired a creation myth that starts with such a deep, pervasive darkness? Geological evidence points to two staggering possibilities rooted in Australia's volatile position on the Pacific Ring of Fire. The first is a meteorite impact of colossal scale. The Henbury craters in the Northern Territory, formed by a meteorite that crashed to Earth thousands of years ago, would have been a local apocalypse. The flash, the thunderous roar, and the immense cloud of dust and debris would have blotted out the sun for a vast area, creating a temporary but terrifying long night. An even more widespread event could have been a massive volcanic eruption from a neighboring island, like the eruption of Toba we discussed earlier. While Toba itself was older, similar eruptions in the Indonesian archipelago would have cast a pall of ash over northern Australia, creating a prolonged, sunless period that could have lasted for years. For a people intimately connected to the land, such an event would not be forgotten. It would be processed, understood, and integrated into their very understanding of how the world came to be. The great darkness of the Dreamtime is thus a powerful fusion of spiritual truth and ancient environmental memory, a record of a time when the world was remade, preserved not on clay but in song. High in the Andes, the Inca Empire believed the sun god Inti was their divine ancestor, a life-giving force who could never truly abandon them. Yet their own legends, preserved by Spanish chroniclers after the conquest, tell a different, more terrifying story. They speak of a time when Inti hid his face, plunging the world into a prolonged and frigid night. This was not a simple eclipse but a sustained absence, a cosmic betrayal that threatened to unravel their entire civilization. The Inca worldview was built on a sacred balance, a reciprocity between humanity and the gods. The sun provided light, warmth, and life, and in return, the people offered prayers, rituals, and sacrifices. A prolonged darkness was the ultimate rupture of this pact, a sign that Inti was deeply displeased or that a powerful dark force had temporarily triumphed over him. The societal response was immediate and extreme. The Sapa Inca, the emperor himself considered the son of Inti, would have led desperate ceremonies. Priests sacrificed precious llamas and, in the most dire circumstances, even children, known as Capacocha, in a solemn attempt to restore the cosmic balance and persuade the sun to return. These were not acts of cruelty, but of profound obligation, a desperate attempt to repay the debt they felt they owed and to reignite the celestial fire upon which all life depended. What cataclysmic event could have been interpreted as the sun god hiding? Geological evidence points squarely to the cataclysmic eruption of Huaynaputina in southern Peru in the year 1600. This was the largest volcanic eruption in South America's recorded history, a monstrous explosion that sent a column of ash and gas soaring into the stratosphere. The fallout would have been immediate and terrifying for the Inca. A thick, abrasive blanket of gray ash would have smothered the sacred valleys, contaminating water and killing crops. The sky would have turned a sickly, coppery color, then an impenetrable black as the ash cloud blotted out the sun for days or even weeks. The subsequent volcanic winter would have caused temperatures to plummet, killing harvests across the region and bringing famine. The correlation is undeniable, a geological cataclysm of immense power occurring within the living memory of those who passed down the legends. The story of Inti's disappearance is thus a perfect fusion of faith and disaster, a spiritual explanation for an environmental catastrophe so profound it threatened to extinguish not just the light, but the very will of a people who saw the sun as their father. That Babylonian obsession with celestial messages was codified into a 70-tablet series known as Enuma Anu Enlil. This was their master reference for divination, a comprehensive guide on how to read the sky as a divine text. Within its cuneiform columns, specific omens foretold the terror of a prolonged darkness. One tablet entry chillingly states, "If the sun is dark on its first day and remains dark for the duration of the day, a powerful enemy will rise and attack the land." Another warns, "If the day is like the middle watch of the night, the king will be deposed and a foreigner will seize the throne." These were not vague prophecies, they were precise, conditional statements linking the duration and intensity of the darkness to specific political and military outcomes. The astrological interpretation was a complex science. The priest astronomers, known as Tupshar Enuma Anu Enlil, would not merely note the darkness itself. They would correlate it with the positions of the planets, the phase of the moon, and even the direction of the wind that day. For instance, if the darkness occurred while Jupiter was in the constellation of Leo, it might be interpreted as a sign that the king's personal fortune would soon fade. The entire apparatus of the state was then mobilized in response to this celestial verdict. The king's chief duty was to perform rituals of atonement to appease the angry gods, often involving public processions, the recitation of specific hymns, and lavish offerings at the temple of the sun god Shamash. These were desperate attempts to correct the cosmic imbalance and prevent the prophesied doom from coming to pass. Modern astronomers have used powerful software to run retrocalculations, modeling the precise positions of celestial bodies in Mesopotamia's ancient skies. While a standard solar eclipse cannot explain a multi-day event, these simulations have identified a fascinating possibility. A close pass by a large, dusty comet could have been the trigger. The comet's vast tail, streaming millions of miles through space, is composed of fine dust and ice. If Earth's orbit passed through this debris field, our planet could have been showered with a cloud of particles dense enough to scatter and block sunlight for several days. This would create the exact phenomenon described in the omens, a darkness that was not a simple eclipse but a lingering, atmospheric veil. The Babylonian response, a blend of meticulous observation and profound faith, shows a civilization that believed it could read its fate in the stars and through ritual rewrite it. The Korean peninsula holds its own ancient memory of a stolen sun. Within the Samguk Soggi, the official historical record of the Three Kingdoms period, a stark entry from the year 777 of the Common Era states that the day did not dawn for an entire week. In the Kingdom of Silla, a society built on a rigid aristocratic class system known as the bone rank, this was more than a meteorological anomaly. It was a direct challenge to the divine authority of the king. Imagine the terror in the royal court at Jeonju as the seventh day of darkness began, with no sign of the sun's return. The established order, which claimed to be sanctioned by heaven, was being fundamentally undermined by the heavens themselves. The Chronicle describes a period of profound social unrest, with people lighting torches at midday, and the government struggling to maintain control over a population convinced the world was ending. This event struck at the very heart of their political structure. The king's legitimacy depended on his perceived connection to the celestial powers, and a week-long night was the ultimate sign of heavenly disapproval. How could such an event occur? The geography of the region provides a compelling answer. To the east, in Japan, the volcano Mount Pictou on the border of modern-day China and North Korea experienced a colossal eruption around the year 946, one of the most violent in the last 10,000 years. While this date is later than the Samguk Soggi record, it demonstrates the region's immense volcanic potential. A similar, slightly earlier eruption from a Japanese volcano like Mount Asama or a Chinese volcano like Changbeichen could easily have been the culprit. Prevailing westerly winds would have carried a colossal plume of volcanic ash directly over the Korean peninsula. This ash cloud, a high-altitude blanket of fine glass and rock particles, would have acted like a global shade, scattering and absorbing sunlight for hundreds of miles. The result would not have been a simple, starless night, but a deep, eerie, and persistent twilight lasting for days. The correlation becomes even stronger when we examine the physical evidence. Ice core samples from Greenland, which act as a layered archive of Earth's atmospheric history, show a pronounced spike in sulfate deposits around the late 8th century. This is the chemical fingerprint of a massive volcanic eruption, and its timing aligns hauntingly well with the Samguk Soggi's record of the Great Darkness. The Korean Chronicle, therefore, is not just a local legend, it is a crucial piece of a global puzzle, a human witness statement to a geological event that left its mark on the very ice at the top of the world. Another kingdom's chronicle tells of a darkness that cemented a legendary dynasty. The Kebra Nagast, Ethiopia's sacred book of kings, recounts a great darkness that fell upon the land as a divine judgment. This was not a random disaster, but a pivotal moment in a story that connects the Horn of Africa directly to the throne of Jerusalem. The text weaves biblical tradition with local history, describing how this profound gloom descended as a consequence of the people's rejection of the Ark of the Covenant. The narrative is deeply intertwined with the epic tale of the Queen of Sheba's visit to King Solomon and their son Menelik, who later brought the Ark to Ethiopia. The darkness, therefore, was not just an environmental event. It was a spiritual crisis with profound political implications for the newly established Solomonic dynasty. What could have caused such an event in this specific region? The Horn of Africa is a geologically active area, and one compelling theory points to a massive volcanic eruption. A volcano in the Afar region, or even a distant eruption in the Arabian Peninsula, could have spewed a towering plume of ash high into the atmosphere. Prevailing winds could then have carried this veil of fine particles directly over the Ethiopian highlands, blotting out the sun for days and creating the exact conditions described in the Kebra Nagast. This environmental disaster was interpreted through the lens of faith. The people saw the prolonged night not as a geological accident, but as a direct response from God, a punishment for their initial refusal to accept the ark's presence. This interpretation served a powerful political purpose. By framing the darkness as a divine sanction, the text legitimized the new Solomonic line of kings. It showed that the covenant and the power of the God of Israel had truly moved to Ethiopia with the ark. The event cemented the authority of the emperor, positioning him as the rightful heir to a sacred legacy who had endured and overcome a celestial warning. The story, preserved on delicate goatskin pages of ancient manuscripts, uses the memory of a tangible, terrifying darkness to forge a nation's spiritual identity, forever linking its royal house to a moment when the sky itself passed judgment. The vast Pacific Ocean holds stories of darkness that were not an omen but a navigational test. For the Polynesian voyagers who mastered the largest ocean on Earth, oral traditions and chants preserve memories of a different kind of long night, one encountered far from land. Their celestial navigation was a precise science, reading the stars as a map and the ocean swells as highways. But their chants also speak of the Po Loa, the long night, when the guiding stars vanished for days during a voyage. This was not a darkness of divine judgment, but a tangible, terrifying shroud that could mean a journey's end. What could blot out the stars over the open ocean with such totality? The most immediate cause would be an immense storm system. A powerful tropical cyclone generates a dense, towering canopy of cloud that can stretch for hundreds of miles, completely obscuring the heavens. A canoe caught in such a system would be plunged into a disorienting gloom, with no sun by day and no stars by night, lost on a featureless sea. An even more pervasive phenomenon would be the high-altitude ash from a volcanic eruption on a distant island. An event like the explosion of Kaharoa in New Zealand around the year 1300 would have spewed a fine, suspended haze across vast stretches of the Pacific. This veil would not necessarily bring stormy weather, but it would diffuse and extinguish the starlight, rendering the master navigator's primary tool useless for weeks. The response to this crisis was a breathtaking display of human resilience and accumulated knowledge. When the stars disappeared, the navigators switched to reading the ocean itself. They memorized the rhythm and direction of specific swells, waves that can travel for thousands of miles unchanged. They watched the flight patterns of birds and noted the presence of specific types of driftwood or seaweed, all clues to the proximity of unseen land. These stories of the Po Loa were not tales of despair, but lessons in perseverance. They were chanted to new generations of wayfinders as the ultimate examination, a test of whether they could hold their course purely by feel and memory when the sky went black. The legends emphasize that knowledge stored in the mind and passed down through song was the true light that could guide them through any darkness. This was a profound faith not in gods but in human ingenuity, a belief that their understanding of the natural world was a torch that no cloud could ever truly extinguish. Herodotus wrote of the Scythian nomads encountering a darkness that was not of night. This ancient historian, often called the father of history, recorded tales from the vast Eurasian steppe of a deep gloom that halted entire tribes in their tracks. For a people whose life was defined by movement, by following the herds across an endless sea of grass, a prolonged darkness was not an inconvenience, it was an existential crisis. Their survival depended on reading the sky and the land, and a sudden, sunless shroud would have severed their connection to both. The artifacts they left behind, intricate goldwork depicting beasts and warriors, offer no direct image of this event. Yet the very nature of their art, a portable wealth for a people always ready to move, speaks to a lifestyle uniquely vulnerable to a sky that refused to clear. What meteorological monster could have conjured such a thing on the open plains? The answer lies in the very soil beneath their horses' hooves, a black blizzard. This is not a simple dust storm, but a cataclysm of wind and earth. Imagine a wall of dust 1,000 feet high, rolling across the horizon with the roar of 1,000 avalanches. It is a swirling, suffocating mass of fine, black topsoil ripped from the ground by freakishly powerful winds, a tempest of dirt so dense it blots out the sun completely. Under such a pall, the world vanishes, the horizon disappears, landmarks are erased, and the air becomes thick and gritty, impossible to breathe without cloth pressed tightly to the face. For the Scythians, a black blizzard meant more than just disorientation. Their entire migratory route would collapse. The herds of horses and cattle they depended on would panic, scatter, or simply suffocate. The scant water sources they navigated between would be fouled with silt or buried entirely. A nomadic tribe caught in a multi-day event like this would be forced to a standstill, hunkering down in their felt tents while their world shrank to the few feet of air they could keep clear. How would such an event reshape their culture, their very understanding of the world? The memory of being trapped, of helplessness against a force that could steal the sky, would have been seared into their oral traditions. It would explain a deep-seated reverence for wind gods and earth spirits, deities of furious power that demanded respect. The darkness was a lesson from the steppe itself, a brutal reminder that their mastery of the land was conditional, and that the horizon they chased could at any moment turn to absolute black. The caldera of Santorini is a breathtaking monument to one of the most violent events in human history. Around the year 1600 before the Common Era, the volcanic island of Thera, the heart of the Minoan civilization, exploded with a force estimated to be 4 times greater than the eruption of Krakatoa. This was a volcanic explosivity index event of a 7, a super-colossal eruption that would have been heard across continents. The initial blast sent a column of superheated gas, ash, and rock punching 30 miles into the stratosphere. Then, the magma chamber beneath the island collapsed, swallowing 60 cubic miles of rock and creating the vast, sea-filled basin we see today. But the immediate horror for the Minoans on Crete, just 70 miles to the south, was the ash cloud. A towering black wall of pumice and fine volcanic glass raced across the sea, plunging their world into an absolute, suffocating darkness in the middle of the day. This was not a temporary dimming. For the Minoans, the sun could have been blotted out for days, perhaps even a week, under this relentless, abrasive fallout. Can you picture the scene in the great palace of Knossos? One moment, a vibrant, sophisticated society bustling in the Mediterranean sun. The next, a terrifying, sunless silence as a foot of heavy, grey ash smothers the courtyards, collapses roofs, and makes the very air a poison. The darkness was only the beginning. The ash fall would have destroyed the entire agricultural cycle, contaminating freshwater sources and rendering fertile fields barren for a generation. Then the tsunamis came. The collapse of the caldera triggered waves over 100 feet high that would have scoured the northern coast of Crete, obliterating the Minoan navy, their primary source of trade and power, and inundating their vital port cities. This multi-pronged cataclysm did not just cause a bad season, it shattered the entire economic and political foundation of the Minoan world. Their dominance of the seas was gone, their food supply was annihilated, and their people were plunged into a darkness both literal and metaphorical. Archaeological digs on Crete reveal a stark timeline, a distinct pale layer of Theran ash like a ghostly blanket, separates the vibrant, colorful Minoan art and architecture from the simpler, poorer structures built above it. The civilization never truly recovered its former glory, its power vacuum quickly filled by the rising Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. The thorough eruption was more than a natural disaster. It was a geological execution of a superpower, a darkness so complete it erased a world and created a legend that may well have been the very origin of the lost city of Atlantis. The great trading empire of Carthage faced a darkness it could not outrun. Fragmentary Punic records and the commentaries of their Roman enemies hint at a terrifying period when the sun grew dim over the North African coast, an event interpreted as the wrath of their chief god Baal-Hamon. In the Carthaginian religion, this deity was not a distant figure, but a powerful lord of the sky and fertility who demanded absolute devotion. A prolonged, unexplained darkness would have been seen as a catastrophic sign of his displeasure, a divine judgment threatening the very survival of the state. The city's response, documented in both grudging Roman histories and archaeological evidence, was a desperate attempt to regain divine favor. This involved the most extreme form of sacrifice known as the Molk, a ritual where offerings, sometimes including children, were cremated in a sacred precinct known as the Tophet. To the Carthaginians, this was not an act of cruelty, but a necessary transaction, the giving of their most precious possession to appease a furious god and restore the cosmic order that the darkness had shattered. What natural event could have been misinterpreted as this divine anger? The geography of their location provides a starkly logical answer. A colossal Saharan dust storm, a haboob of unprecedented scale, could have swept north from the interior. Such a storm carries billions of tons of fine, red laterite dust, a particulate so dense it can block out the sun for days, turning day into an eerie, coppery twilight and coating everything in a ruddy film. For a maritime power whose lifeblood was the clear sky and predictable winds, this atmospheric paralysis would have been both an economic and a spiritual catastrophe. This event did not happen in a vacuum. It occurred against the backdrop of the Punic Wars, a century-long death struggle with Rome. A major darkness event, interpreted as Baal-Hamon's wrath, would have been a severe blow to Carthaginian morale at a critical juncture. It would have fueled Roman propaganda, painting the Carthaginians as a people so morally corrupt that their own gods had turned the sky black against them. The memory of that sunless time and the desperate rituals it provoked became part of the narrative of the city's inevitable fall, a story written by the victors to explain how a great civilization was ultimately abandoned by the very heavens it sought to placate. Tacitus described the forests of Germania as a place where shadows congealed into perpetual twilight. In his work Germania, the Roman historian wrote of a land so choked with ancient trees that the sun could not penetrate the canopy, creating a world of half-light and deep, lingering fogs. He and other Roman chroniclers recorded tales from their legions of a different sort of darkness that fell upon these northern lands, a gloom so profound and lasting it seemed to emanate from the very soil. For the Romans, this was not merely a weather report, it was a characterization of the people themselves. The endless woods and the inexplicable blackouts became proof of a savage, uncivilized world, a place where nature itself was untamed and hostile. How much of this was observation, and how much was political propaganda designed to justify Rome's failed attempts to conquer the region? The descriptions of a sunless landscape align with a known climatic shift. Paleoclimatologists have identified a period of global cooling around the 1st century, a downturn linked to increased volcanic activity. A major eruption, perhaps from an Alaskan or Icelandic volcano, would have pumped a veil of sulfate aerosols into the stratosphere. This haze would have drifted over northern Europe, dimming the sun for years and leading to cooler, wetter summers. The result in Germania would have been a dramatic intensification of the already damp conditions. The already dense forests would have become saturated, releasing thick, persistent ground fogs that could have lingered for days in the low-lying river valleys. This natural meteorological phenomenon, filtered through Roman prejudice, became a legendary darkness. The Roman maps of the era tell their own story. They label this vast, uncharted territory with ominous phrases, often marking it as terra incognita, with illustrations of dark woods and mythical beasts. These were not accurate geographical tools, but ideological statements. The maps reinforced the idea that beyond the Rhine lay a shadowy realm of chaos, a direct contrast to the sun-drenched, ordered world of the Mediterranean. The Germanic tribes living within this perceived perpetual dusk were thus framed not just as military opponents, but as creatures of the gloom, their entire culture shaped by the absence of Roman light. This powerful imagery of a dark and forbidding north, born from a mix of real climate events and imperial bias, would shape the European imagination for 1,000 years, creating a divide between a civilized south and a barbaric wilderness that was literally and figuratively veiled in shadow. The Silk Road was a fragile thread of life stretched across a continent of lethal emptiness. Chinese and Persian traveler accounts preserved on fragile manuscripts tell of a terror far worse than bandits or thirst, a sudden and absolute darkness that fell upon caravans in the middle of the day. One such chronicle describes a merchant train caught in the Taklamakan Desert, a place whose very name translates to "you go in, you don't come out." The sky turned from brilliant blue to a menacing copper, then to an impenetrable black. Camels bellowed in panic and refused to move, while experienced guides, masters of reading the stars, found their celestial maps utterly useless. The logistical nightmare was absolute. A caravan's survival depended on precise daily progress from one hidden water hole to the next. A single day's delay could mean running out of water, but a darkness lasting for days meant becoming permanently lost in a trackless ocean of sand, your entire fortune and your very life buried under the dunes. What force could conjure such a perfect, sun-killing shroud in the desert? The most immediate culprit was the Haiyifeng, the Black Wind, a sandstorm of legendary ferocity. The Taklamakan is a vast basin of fine, shifting sand, a perfect fuel for colossal tempests. Winds screaming down from the surrounding mountains could lift billions of tons of this fine dust high into the atmosphere, creating a swirling wall of grit hundreds of feet high that could blot out the sun for a week. Yet some accounts describe a different kind of darkness, one without the abrasive sting of sand, a cleaner, colder gloom that settled for days. This points to a second, more distant cause, the high-altitude ash from a volcanic eruption in Central Asia or even farther afield. A volcano like Changbaishan on the Korean border could have spewed a fine, suspended haze that drifted over the trade routes, dimming the sun into a pale, useless coin and plunging the Silk Road into a disorienting twilight. It was in these desperate, motionless camps trapped by an unseen sky that some of the most profound cultural exchanges occurred. With travel impossible, merchants from Rome, Persia, India, and China were forced into a suspended community. They shared their limited water and food, and in the endless, unnerving dark they shared stories. A Buddhist monk might chant sutras to calm the frightened, while a Nestorian Christian trader recited prayers from his own tradition. They exchanged medical knowledge for treating dust-choked lungs and passed the time by sharing maps and trade secrets, their languages blending in the dark. The very goods they carried, silks, spices, and glassware, became tangible points of connection, their origins and uses explained by firelight in a tiny pool of visibility. This enforced stillness created a rare intimacy on a road otherwise defined by constant motion, proving that even when the world went black, the human impulse to connect and trade could still flicker like a flame in the vast desert night. A stone pillar at Angkor Wat holds a Sanskrit verse describing a time when the sky grew heavy and the sun was swallowed. This was not a poetic metaphor for monsoon clouds, but a precise record of a prolonged, devastating gloom that fell upon the Khmer Empire. The inscription speaks of a darkness that corrupted the harvest and silenced the temples, a crisis that struck at the twin pillars of their power, food and faith. How could a civilization that built the world's largest religious monument, a testament to its connection with the sun and the gods, be brought to its knees by a darkened sky? The answer may lie in a cataclysm over 1,000 miles away. In 1257, the Samalas volcano on the Indonesian island of Lombok exploded in one of the most violent eruptions of the last 10,000 years. The blast was colossal, sending a plume of ash and sulfur gases shooting high into the stratosphere. Prevailing winds then began their work, carrying this invisible, sun-blocking veil northwest, directly toward mainland Southeast Asia. For the Khmer, the first sign of disaster would have been a gradual dimming. The brilliant tropical sun would have faded to a dull, hazy coin, then vanished altogether behind a persistent, sickly gray pall. Day after day, the oppressive gloom lingered, a permanent twilight that starved their world of light and warmth. The agricultural impact was immediate and catastrophic. The Khmer Empire was an agricultural superpower, its wealth built on a sophisticated hydraulic system of canals and reservoirs known as barrays that supported multiple rice harvests each year. Rice is a crop utterly dependent on strong, direct sunlight. Under the volcanic shroud, temperatures plummeted and photosynthesis slowed to a halt. The endless gray days would have caused widespread crop failure, leading to famine and social unrest across an empire that had always taken its abundance for granted. This environmental shock reverberated directly into their spiritual life. The king was seen as a Devaraja, a god king, whose primary role was to maintain the cosmic order and ensure the fertility of the land. A prolonged darkness and the ensuing famine were the ultimate signs of his failure, a clear indication that the divine favor had been withdrawn. The inscriptions themselves can be read as a desperate act of royal propaganda, an attempt to explain this celestial betrayal and reaffirm the king's shaken authority. The religious practices at Angkor Wat would have intensified in response. The temple, originally dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu, is architecturally a representation of Mount Meru, the home of the gods and the axis of the universe. Its very design is a map of the cosmic order. When that order was broken by the unending night, the priests would have performed elaborate and costly rituals to appease the angry deities. They likely increased offerings and sacrifices, chanting into the unnatural dark, trying to use the power of their sacred geometry and their prayers to pierce the volcanic haze and call the sun back to its rightful place. Modern science provides the chilling evidence that connects the inscription to the volcano. Ice core samples from both Antarctica and Greenland contain a sharp, clear spike of sulfate deposits dated precisely to 1257, the chemical ghost of the Samalas eruption. More recently, archaeologists working in the moats of Angkor have found a thin, almost invisible layer of volcanic ash trapped in the sediment, a direct material link between the Indonesian explosion and the Khmer heartland. The story of the Angkor darkness is a stark reminder of global interconnection, where an eruption on a distant island could cloud the skies over a mighty empire, challenge its god king, and leave a cryptic warning carved in stone for us to decipher centuries later. The Chronicles of the Byzantine historian Procopius describe a year when the sun failed. In 536 of the Common Era, he wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness like the moon, and a dreadful, unending winter gripped the world. This was not a local event. From Italy to China, from Scandinavia to Mesopotamia, written records from this very year all tell the same terrifying story. A mysterious, dry fog descended, blotting out the sun for 18 months and casting the entire northern hemisphere into a deep, persistent twilight. Summer never came. Snow fell in August across China, while crops failed from Ireland to Persia, triggering one of the worst famines in recorded history. This was the year without a summer, and its cause was a geological cataclysm of staggering proportions. Modern science has uncovered the truth hidden within the ice. Core samples drilled from Greenland and Antarctica reveal a massive spike of volcanic sulfates, a chemical timestamp dated precisely to the year 536. The evidence points not to one, but two colossal eruptions, likely in the tropics and in Iceland. These volcanoes pumped billions of tons of ash and sulfur dioxide high into the stratosphere, creating a reflective veil that encircled the globe. This aerosol shield scattered incoming sunlight, turning the sun into a pale, ghostly disk and plunging the planet into a volcanic winter that lasted for years. For the Eastern Roman Empire, ruled from Constantinople by the Emperor Justinian, this environmental collapse was a catastrophe on multiple fronts. The empire was already straining under the immense cost of Justinian's wars to reconquer the Western Roman territories from barbarian kingdoms. The agricultural heartlands from Egypt to Anatolia were now failing. The price of grain skyrocketed, and famine led to social unrest and mass death in the great cities. The profound darkness was interpreted by the deeply Christian populace as a sign of divine wrath, shaking the religious legitimacy of the state at its most vulnerable moment. Then, as if the darkness and famine were not enough, the final blow arrived. In 541, the bubonic plague, now known as the Plague of Justinian, erupted in the empire. The global cooling likely disrupted rodent populations, driving disease-carrying fleas into closer contact with human settlements. The weakened, malnourished population was a tinderbox, and the plague exploded, killing perhaps a quarter of the entire eastern Mediterranean. This triple assault of darkness, famine, and pestilence shattered the Eastern Roman Empire's momentum. Justinian's dream of restoring Rome's ancient glory died in the cold and the dark. The empire, financially and demographically broken, could no longer sustain its vast ambitions, and it began a long, slow contraction. The prolonged darkness of 536 did not just cause a bad year, it fundamentally altered the course of history. It accelerated the end of the ancient world and helped usher in the economic and social stagnation that would characterize the early Middle Ages in Europe. The Byzantine Dark Day stands as a stark testament to how the fragile threads of human civilization can be unraveled by a sudden change in the sky, a reminder that our greatest empires are built on a foundation that a single volcano, thousands of miles away, can shake to its core. High on the Tibetan plateau, where the air is thin and the sky feels close enough to touch, ancient texts whisper of a great and purposeful darkness. Within the sacred scriptures of Tibetan Buddhism and the older Bon traditions, there are accounts not of a sun blotted out by catastrophe, but of a deep, encompassing night that descends as part of a cosmic rhythm. This was not a plague or an omen of doom, but a profound spiritual transition, a necessary veiling of the world before a period of renewal. The imagery is stark and beautiful, a landscape of towering, snow-capped peaks and remote monasteries where the silence is broken only by the chant of monks and the turning of prayer wheels, all set against the backdrop of an infinite, star-filled blackness. In these high-altitude traditions, darkness is not an enemy to be defeated, but a sacred space for inner transformation. The texts describe this period as a time when external distractions fade, forcing beings to turn inward and confront their own mind. It is a metaphor for the spiritual journey itself, where one must navigate the darkness of ignorance to ultimately perceive the clear light of enlightenment. The great darkness is integrated into the very fabric of their cosmology, tied to the vast cycles of time known as kalpas, where worlds are formed, persist, and are dissolved, only to be reborn again from the void. What environmental reality on the roof of the world could have inspired such a profound philosophical concept? The plateau itself is a factory for extreme weather. A phenomenon known as a temperature inversion can trap dense, freezing fog in the high valleys for days on end. This isn't a wispy mist, but an impenetrable, icy shroud that clings to the ground, swallowing villages and monasteries whole and reducing the world to a small, silent circle of fog. The sun becomes a memory, and the vibrant colors of the landscape are muted to shades of gray and white. For those experiencing it, time seems to stop, and the boundary between the self and the outside world begins to dissolve. This natural occurrence provides the perfect physical analogy for the spiritual teachings. Just as the fog isolates and obscures, so too does the ego cloud our true nature. And just as the sun still burns brilliantly above the inversion layer, so too does the nature of mind, or Buddha nature, remain luminous and pure beneath the veils of confusion. The legends of the Great Darkness are a masterful synthesis of observation and insight, using the raw power of the plateau's environment to illustrate a timeless truth about the cycles of existence and the luminous potential hidden within the deepest dark. Deep within the humid jungles of Mesoamerica, the Olmec carved their fears into stone. Their colossal heads, with their stoic, helmeted faces, seem to watch over a land haunted by the memory of a stolen sun. But it is in their smaller, more mysterious sculptures that we find the key to this ancient terror, the word jaguar. This hybrid creature, part human and part big cat, is one of the most pervasive and unsettling motifs in Olmec art. Its snarling mouth, often downturned and toothy, and its infant-like features twisted into a snarl, suggest a being of immense power and supernatural fury. This was not a simple animal spirit, it was a direct representation of a celestial crisis. The mythology seems clear: the jaguar, the most powerful predator of the night, was believed to have devoured the sun. The jaguar's domain was the dark, wet underworld, and its ability to see and hunt in absolute blackness made it the perfect symbol for a force that could overwhelm the light itself. An extended period of darkness would have been interpreted as a great jaguar of the sky holding the sun in its jaws, refusing to let go. So what real event could have inspired such a potent and enduring symbol? A total solar eclipse is the most immediate suspect. For a people who lived by the sun's reliable rhythm, watching its brilliant face be slowly consumed by a black disk would have been a heart-stopping spectacle. The darkness of a total eclipse is profound and unnerving, a sudden, deep twilight that descends in the middle of the day, silencing birds and chilling the air. But an eclipse lasts only minutes, not the days suggested by the cultural trauma embedded in the word jaguar myth. This points to a second, more sustained catastrophe. The Mesoamerican world was, and still is, a volcanically active region. A major eruption, like the one from El Chichon we discussed earlier, could have shrouded the Olmec heartland in ash for weeks. Under such a pall, the world would have been permanently cast in the jaguar's domain, a dim, cold landscape where the rules of day and night were erased. The cultural response was to embody this terror. By carving the word jaguar, the Olmec were giving a face to the invisible force that threatened their world. They were attempting to control the uncontrollable by giving it a form they could comprehend and perhaps, through ritual, appease. The jaguar was not just a beast of prey, it was the living incarnation of the darkness that could swallow the world, a warning from the heart of the jungle that the sun's light was a fragile gift, perpetually at risk of being eaten by the night. The desert poets of pre-Islamic Arabia sang of a darkness that was more than mere night. In the era they called the Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance, their verses are haunted by a deep, unnatural gloom known as the Gasak. This was not the peaceful, star-filled desert dark, but a thick, oppressive shroud that could last for days, a time when the world seemed to hold its breath. One poet laments how the Gasak fell upon his tribe, silencing the camps and making the familiar paths of the desert utterly treacherous. For a people whose survival depended on reading the subtle signs of the landscape, this was a blindness imposed by the heavens themselves. The cultural context of these stories is vital. This was a world of powerful tribal loyalties and oral tradition, where a single poet's words could immortalize a victory or curse an enemy for generations. An event as terrifying as a prolonged darkness would be woven into their lore not as a weather report, but as a divine judgment or a curse from a rival tribe's sorcerer. It was a disruption of the natural and social order, a time when the old rules were suspended and chaos threatened to overwhelm the delicate balance of desert life. What natural phenomenon could have inspired such vivid and widespread fear? The environment itself provides the answer. The Arabian Peninsula is the stage for some of the most ferocious sandstorms on Earth. A haboob, a wall of dust and sand thousands of feet high, can roll across the desert with the roar of an approaching army. Driven by powerful winds, these storms can lift billions of tons of fine, reddish silt, creating a canopy so dense it turns day into an impenetrable, coppery blackness. A series of such storms, one after another, could easily have created the multi-day darkness described in the poetry, a period where the sun was not just hidden but utterly erased. This collective memory of a sunless world did not vanish with the coming of Islam. It was absorbed and transformed, finding a new home within early Islamic eschatology. The profound darkness of the Gasak resonates powerfully with descriptions of the end times in the Quran and Hadith. The concept of the Dajjal, the false messiah who would bring great tribulations, is often associated with bringing darkness and chaos. The imagery of a smoke or a mist that would cover the land echoes the ancient desert fears. The pre-Islamic experience of a tangible, world-ending darkness provided a powerful cultural reference point for the new faith, a shared ancestral terror that was now framed within a grander cosmic narrative of divine judgment and ultimate resurrection. The verses of the desert poets, once sung around tribal fires, became a haunting prelude to a revelation that would forever change the world. Their descriptions of a stolen sun evolving into a warning of the final night that would precede the eternal dawn. 30 distinct cultures scattered across every continent all preserved the same terrifying story. A shared memory of a time when the light failed echoes from the Nile Delta to the high Andes, from the Korean Peninsula to the Mayan lowlands. When we map these 30 records of prolonged darkness, a startling pattern emerges. They are not random. They cluster around specific periods in history, moments of profound global upheaval that left their mark in ice cores and tree rings. This is not a coincidence. It is the fingerprint of a planet in turmoil, a series of global disasters that our ancestors interpreted through the lens of their own beliefs. The leading scientific explanation for the majority of these events points to a single, colossal force: massive volcanic eruptions. A volcano like Thera or Samalas does not just explode locally. It injects billions of tons of sulfur dioxide and fine ash directly into the stratosphere, where winds can carry this reflective veil around the entire globe. This aerosol shield acts like a mirror, bouncing sunlight back into space and plunging vast regions into a prolonged twilight or even absolute blackness for months or years. The volcanic winter that follows is a global phenomenon, and the accounts of darkness from the Byzantine Empire, the Khmer, and the Norse all align perfectly with the chemical signatures of known super-eruptions found in polar ice. The second major culprit is the atmospheric dust cloud, but on a scale we can barely comprehend. A black blizzard on the Eurasian steppe or a haboob in the Arabian desert could create a localized multi-day night. However, for a darkness felt across continents, we must look to the heavens. A close pass by a large, dusty comet, or the atmospheric explosion of a fragmented asteroid, could have filled Earth's upper atmosphere with fine particles of pulverized rock and ice. Circling the planet for days, this cosmic debris would have scattered sunlight into a useless glow, creating the kind of palpable, starless dark described in so many records. This could explain events like the Assyrian three-day night, where the description of a darkness no fire could pierce fits a high-altitude dust veil perfectly. Rare astronomical alignments, while dramatic, are the least likely cause for events lasting more than a few hours. Our solar system is a clockwork of predictable motions, and no known alignment can blot out the sun for days. However, the human perception of time during a crisis is fluid. a total solar eclipse occurring during a period of already heightened tension, perhaps due to a lingering volcanic haze, could have been remembered and recorded as a much longer event, its psychological impact magnifying its actual duration. The true power of these 30 records lies in their collective voice. They are not isolated fairy tales, they are a fragmented yet coherent historical dataset. When an Egyptian papyrus, a Chinese chronicle, and a Roman history all speak of a sunless sky in the same decade, they are describing different perspectives of the same global catastrophe. These ancient voices, once thought to be purely mythological, are now being corroborated by the silent, chemical testimony locked in ancient ice and the stunted growth rings of millennia-old trees. They tell us that our ancestors were not just storytellers, they were survivors. They witnessed the sky fall, and they preserved the warning for us. The sheer scale of these ancient events becomes clear when we examine their modern counterparts. Take the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815, an event so powerful it created the infamous year without a summer. The following year, 1816, saw frost in every month across New England and Europe, with snow falling in June and crops failing globally. This was not a local disaster, it was a volcanic winter, a direct result of the millions of tons of sulfur dioxide the volcano injected high into the stratosphere. There, the gas transformed into a persistent haze of sulfuric acid droplets, a mirror-like veil that reflected sunlight back into space and cooled the entire planet. The mechanism is chillingly simple. A single volcano can dim the sun's power for years, turning brilliant days into a prolonged, gloomy twilight. This modern example gives us a measurable template for the far greater eruptions of the ancient world. Events like the Thera explosion or the Samalas blast, which would have generated volcanic winters of a magnitude we can scarcely conceive. Our proof of these ancient cataclysms is locked away in nature's own archives. Deep within the ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica, scientists drill long cores, extracting a layered timeline of Earth's atmosphere. Each winter's snowfall captures a sample of the air, trapping tiny bubbles and chemical impurities. When a major volcano erupts, it leaves a distinct, sharp band of sulfate deposits in the ice, a chemical signature that can be dated with remarkable precision. These icy strata are the ultimate witness, providing undeniable evidence of eruptions that occurred thousands of years before written history. Tree rings offer another form of testimony. In the years following a massive eruption, the global cooling stunts tree growth, resulting in a ring that is desperately narrow, a silent scream of a year without a proper summer. By matching these narrow rings across ancient wood samples from different continents, we can pinpoint the exact year a darkness fell upon the world, creating a global chronology of ecological shock that aligns perfectly with the historical records of prolonged night. With this physical evidence in hand, modern climate scientists can run sophisticated computer models. They input the data from ice cores and tree rings, simulating the atmospheric conditions following a super eruption. The models reveal the terrifying efficiency of a volcanic winter. They show how the aerosol plume would have circulated the globe within weeks, how it would have suppressed monsoon rains in Asia while amplifying droughts in Africa, and how the resulting famine would have rippled across interconnected civilizations. These are not just abstract simulations, they are digital recreations of the very scenarios described in the admonitions of Ipuwer and the Bamboo Annals. The models tell us that the darkness was not merely a lack of light, it was the trigger for a cascade of failure, a collapse of agriculture, a breakdown of trade, and a shattering of political order. This scientific deep dive transforms those ancient stories from myth into meteorology, revealing a planet where the sky could, and did, fall without warning, leaving humanity to document the long night in the only languages they had: clay, poetry, and stone. This shared trauma of a vanishing sun left a permanent scar on the human psyche, fundamentally reshaping the very architecture of civilization. When the light failed, societies did not merely recover, they reinvented their worldviews, building new defenses against the terror of an endless night. This is etched into the stones they left behind. Across cultures, we see a desperate architectural response, a collective turning toward the light. The Great Pyramids of Giza are precisely aligned to the sun's path, acting as colossal machines to ensure its daily rebirth. At Karnak, the hypostyle hall was designed so the rising sun would illuminate the inner sanctum on specific days, a yearly promise that order prevailed over chaos. In the Americas, the Sun Dagger site in Choco Canyon uses a precise rock spire to cast a dagger of light onto a spiral petroglyph only during the solstices, a complex calendar carved in stone to guarantee the sun's return. These were not just temples, they were instruments of cosmic insurance, physical prayers against the darkness their ancestors had endured. This fear also forged new social contracts, centralizing power in the hands of those who claimed to control the celestial order. The god-king emerged as a direct answer to the crisis. In Egypt, the pharaoh became the living embodiment of Horus, the son of the sun god Ra, personally responsible for maintaining Mat against the forces of disorder that darkness represented. In the Andes, the Sapa Inca was the son of Inti, and his failure to prevent a prolonged night could lead to his ritual sacrifice, the ultimate price for failing his cosmic duty. This centralization extended to the very organization of society. The massive labor projects from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the barrays of Ankara required a powerful, centralized state to command resources and manpower. The prolonged darkness, in essence, may have accelerated the rise of the very empires that then codified the memory of that darkness into their foundational myths. Mythology itself was rewritten by the event. The archetypal battle between a hero and a chaos monster, found from Mesopotamia to Scandinavia, often centers on a beast that threatens to devour the sun or moon. The Egyptian serpent Apep, eternally fought by Ra's solar bark, is the personification of the primordial darkness that must be defeated every single night. In Norse myth, the wolf skull eternally chases the sun, and his success will mark the beginning of Ragnarok. These are not just exciting stories, they are cultural coping mechanisms, narrative frameworks that gave a name and a face to an incomprehensible natural disaster. By turning atmospheric ash into a monstrous serpent, our ancestors made the terror manageable, something that could, in story at least, be fought and overcome. Ultimately, this collective trauma reveals a universal human response to catastrophe. Whether it was the Maya performing bloodletting rituals to nourish a weakened sun god or the Babylonian king enacting the substitute king ritual to absorb celestial wrath, the pattern is the same. A desperate attempt to restore balance through ritual, to use human action to mend a broken sky. The fall of empires like the Minoans or the severe weakening of the Eastern Romans shows that these events were not just spiritual tests but concrete historical pivots. The memory of the long night forced humanity to look upward in fear and wonder, driving the development of astronomy, architecture, and statecraft in a unified effort to never again be caught helpless in the dark. It is a profound legacy born from the deepest of fears that ultimately pushed civilizations to reach for the light in every way they knew how. 30 voices from the ancient world all whisper the same terrifying truth. From Egypt to China, from the Andes to the frozen north, our ancestors preserved a shared memory of the sky going black. These 30 records of prolonged darkness are far more than mere myth or isolated disaster reports. They form a collective human testimony, a fragmented history where faith, fact, and fear intertwine. We started with a single Egyptian papyrus and journeyed across continents and millennia, discovering that the story of a vanishing sun is one of humanity's oldest and most universal narratives. The scientific explanations, from volcanic super-eruptions to continent-spanning dust storms, provide the physical mechanisms for these events, yet it is the human response that truly defines them. These prolonged nights were not just atmospheric phenomena, They were existential crises that forged empires, toppled kings, and reshaped the very foundations of religion. They compelled us to build pyramids aligned with the sun, to develop astronomy as a form of celestial diplomacy, and to weave our deepest fears into the epic stories of gods and monsters we still tell today. This resilience in the face of the inexplicable is our greatest inheritance from those long-ago nights. When the world went dark, our ancestors did not simply surrender. They lit ritual fires, they chanted prayers into the gloom, they carved their warnings in stone, and they meticulously observed the heavens, desperate to find a pattern, a reason, a way to never be so helpless again. Their legacy is not just one of terror, but of profound ingenuity. The next time you look up at a clear blue sky, remember that its constancy is a gift our ancestors could not always take for granted. Their stories live on, not just in dusty manuscripts, but in the very structure of our civilizations, built as bulwarks against the dark. Do you have a local legend, a family story, or a historical mystery from your own part of the world that speaks of a similar event? The conversation these 30 records started is far from over. Share your thoughts and discoveries in the comments below. And if you want to continue unraveling history's greatest puzzles with us, be sure to subscribe for our next deep dive into